Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, December 12th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 78.9 degrees, with a low dipping to 52.2, so expect a mild day with plenty of sunshine, perfect for getting out and about. Coming up, we'll explore Trump's strategy for consolidating AI oversight at the federal level to outpace China and streamline chaotic state rules. We'll also examine the ongoing debates surrounding California's sole remaining nuclear facility, even after it secured a vital operational extension. Plus, other key stories from around the world, including updates on global markets and local impacts. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We're starting with a sweeping new move on artificial intelligence from the White House. Reporter Ethan Hart joins us now. What did the president sign, and why now?
Yesterday, December 11th, President Trump signed an executive order called, quote, ensuring a national policy framework for artificial intelligence, end quote. He argued the U.S. needs one federal referee for AI instead of what he called a 50-state patchwork. According to BBC News, the signing was framed as a competitiveness push, especially to keep pace with China's centralized system.
So the goal is one national rulebook. Does this order actually change the law?
Not by itself. An executive order directs federal agencies, but it doesn't rewrite statutes, which is why legal observers say the real test will be how far agencies push their authority. The Guardian reports the White House is effectively reviving a failed GOP idea from earlier this year, blocking state AI rules for a decade by using agency action instead of legislation.
What's the administration's argument for moving fast like this?
The president told reporters, quote, we want to have one central source of approval, end quote, warning that 50 different approvals would make big AI investments impossible. CBS News, citing the Associated Press, notes he also said, quote, there's only going to be one winner, end quote, in the global AI race. Supporters cast this as beating China by clearing red tape before it slows innovation.
What exactly does the order tell agencies to do?
It lays out a few tracks. First, it orders the Justice Department to form an AI litigation task force under Attorney General Pam Bondi to challenge state laws they think are unconstitutional or conflict with federal priorities. BBC News says venture capitalist and White House advisor David Sachs is expected to help spotlight which state rules they view as the most onerous.
Which state laws are in the crosshairs first?
California's model disclosure rules for large AI systems are a top target, along with Colorado's anti-discrimination requirements for hiring algorithms. Utah's data transparency rules and Texas's limitations on certain private sector AI uses are also on the list. The Guardian notes the task force could lean on the Dormant Commerce Clause, arguing some of these state rules burden interstate commerce.
Beyond DOJ lawsuits, are other agencies getting new marching orders?
Yes. The Department of Commerce is supposed to publish a roster of state AI provisions it deems problematic, including any that compel so-called truthful outputs to be altered or embed diversity mandates the White House views as compelled speech. The FTC is asked to clarify that its authority over deceptive and unfair practices can preempt state requirements that force deception in AI outputs, while the FCC is to explore a federal reporting standard for AI models that would override conflicting state reporting rules.
That sounds like a big preemption play. Do they have the authority?
That's where the legal debate heats up. The order cites existing statutes, the FTC Act for Unfair or Deceptive Practices, the Communications Act for the FCC, but it doesn't point to a brand new law that expressly wipes out state rules. Analysts at the American Constitution Society and Cornell's Legal Information Institute question whether the administration can achieve broad preemption without Congress, especially after a bipartisan Senate stripped that approach from legislation earlier this year.
I'm hearing they're also using federal money as leverage. What's that about?
The order tells the Commerce Secretary to tie some broadband equity, access, and deployment program funds to whether a state's AI laws are deemed too onerous. That's a $42.45 billion pot from the 2021 infrastructure law. CBS News describes this as an incentive to get states to align. The Guardian calls it coercive because those broadband funds aren't directly about AI.
Could that funding move hold up in court?
It's not a slam dunk. Under South Dakota versus Dole, strings on federal dollars must be clearly stated and related to the program's purpose, and not run afoul of the Constitution. Linking broadband money to AI policy could flunk the relatedness test, and NFIB versus Sebelius warns against coercion when the stakes are huge, which a lot of governors will argue is exactly what's happening here.
Are states already responding, or is it still too soon?
It's early, just 1 day since the signing, so no lawsuits are on the docket yet, according to Engadget and PC Mag. But California Governor Gavin Newsom blasted the order yesterday in a statement titled, quote, "Trump's AI executive order advances corruption, not innovation," end quote, accusing him of, quote, "ongoing grift," end quote, and promising California would continue to lead with, quote, "smart and effective policymaking," end quote. Given California's sweeping rules and the tech industry footprint there, they're likely to be a lead plaintiff if this goes to court.
What about Colorado, since its law on algorithmic discrimination is pretty prominent?
Governor Jared Polis has been nuanced. He signed the law, but previously worried about patchwork and even floated a federal moratorium last summer, according to the Colorado Sun. As of today, there's no fresh statement from him or Attorney General Phil Weiser, but the state may tweak rules to guard its federal funding while defending core protections. That's the tightrope many states will walk in the coming weeks.
And Republicans? Are they lining up behind it or divided?
Mixed there, too. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis called the order a subsidy for big tech and federal overreach, pushing back on the idea that Washington should dictate the rules for everyone. In Congress, Democrats like Senator Ed Markey called it an, quote, "early Christmas present for his CEO billionaire buddies," end quote. While Republicans who favor a lighter touch welcome the effort to sweep away what they see as ideological constraints on AI.
Where's industry on this? Are big AI companies cheering?
Tech trade groups are upbeat. NetChoice's Patrick Hedger told BBC News they're ready to work with the White House and Congress on national standards and a clear rulebook. Major players like OpenAI, Google, Meta, and Anthropic, which have all lobbied against a state patchwork, didn't offer detailed comments in those reports, but venture firms such as Andreessen Horowitz and David Sachs's network have been vocal that fragmentation could hand China the lead.
You mentioned China a few times. How central is that comparison to the sales pitch?
It's the centerpiece. The president and his advisors argue that Beijing's centralized approvals let companies scale faster, and that America needs a single, predictable regime to compete. CBS News notes Trump's phrasing, quote, "only one winner," end quote, was meant to crystallize that zero-sum framing.
Let's talk about what's not in the order. Are there strong national safeguards on bias or privacy?
Not yet. The order asks for a federal framework to come later, one that preempts conflicting state laws and keeps some protections for kids, but it doesn't create new enforceable guardrails on discrimination, misinformation, or privacy right now. Critics told BBC News and The Guardian that prioritizing speed over safety leaves vulnerable communities exposed to algorithmic bias and surveillance without a solid backstop.
What about children's safety? I heard there's an exception.
There is. The BBC reports the order explicitly spares state protections focused on kids, like online safety rules, from federal challenges. That carve-out was designed to blunt criticism from parents, groups, but advocates like Mothers Against Media Addiction still argue broader state guardrails are essential to protect kids, where AI features bleed into everything from chatbots to content feeds.
How widespread are state AI laws at this point?
As of today, the International Association of Privacy Professionals counts 4 states with comprehensive AI laws touching private sector uses: California, Colorado, Utah, and Texas. Many others have narrower measures, like bans on deepfake election ads or non-consensual AI porn. Those broader 4 focus on disclosure, bias audits, and data transparency, aiming to catch discriminatory outcomes in hiring, lending, or healthcare that studies have documented, as CBS News has reported.
You mentioned Congress stripped a similar idea earlier this year. Why does that matter now?
It speaks to congressional intent, or the lack of it. The Guardian notes a proposed 10-year blackout on state AI rules was removed in a 99-1 Senate vote, which undercuts the claim that agencies should bulldoze state policy via executive action. Inside Global Tech and everycrsreport.com point out that, in court, judges often look to whether Congress has clearly authorized preemption before letting agencies push states aside.
Let's drill down on the legal theories. What's the anti-commandeering argument here?
The anti-commandeering doctrine says Washington can't force states to enact or enforce federal regulatory programs. Even if the administration doesn't order states to pass laws, using heavy spending leverage or preemption by guidance could be framed as backdoor commandeering. Murphy versus NCAA is the modern touchstone, and lawyers from groups like the Federalist Society and state attorneys general expect to cite it once suits are filed.
If lawsuits land, what's the likely first move from states?
Seek a temporary restraining order, especially against the DOJ task force's immediate challenges or any threatened funding holdbacks. Plaintiffs would argue irreparable harm if broadband money gets tied up or if companies must retool overnight. The Washington Times and PC Mag both note that even with quick filings, preliminary hearings could stretch into early 2026.
Does the order touch copyright or speech?
Indirectly. The Commerce Directive flags state rules that require models to alter outputs in ways the White House frames as compelled speech, hinting at a First Amendment angle against diversity or inclusion mandates embedded in AI behavior. That's going to collide with state civil rights rationales, which is why you'll see courts balancing free speech claims against anti-discrimination goals.
How does this affect the AI companies operating nationwide right now?
In the short term, companies may feel emboldened to resist state disclosures or audits while the feds telegraph preemption. But legal uncertainty cuts both ways. Without a clear federal statute, they risk being caught between clashing directives until courts or Congress settle the question. R Street Institute analysts argue that, even so, a single national framework would reduce compliance costs compared to 50 different playbooks.
Are there broader stakes beyond tech policy here?
Absolutely. This is a federalism fight wrapped in a tech debate. How much Washington can shape emerging industry rules when states move first? Broadband Breakfast and the Colorado Sun warn it could fracture relationships between state regulators and federal agencies, setting precedents other industries will test in climate policy, data privacy, and healthcare AI.
Before we wrap, any final thing people should watch for in the next week or two?
Look for two dominoes. First, whether California, Colorado, or a multi-state coalition files suit seeking a TRO against the funding tie-ins or the DOJ task force. Second, whether the FTC and FCC release aggressive policy statements quickly. If they do, that signals the White House wants to lock in positions before courts can slow them. If not, we may see more back-channel negotiation with governors to blunt the blow.
Ethan Hart, thanks for breaking it down. We'll keep watching this in the days after yesterday's signing. California's only nuclear plant just got a key green light to keep running. Reporter Chloe Nigon is with us. Chloe, what did the Coastal Commission decide yesterday?
The California Coastal Commission voted 9-3 yesterday, December 11th, to extend Diablo Canyon's coastal development permit, which lets the plant keep operating at least through 2030. Commissioners framed it as a narrow call on shoreline impacts, not a referendum on nuclear power. According to the Los Angeles Times and the Commission's own staff report, the extension comes with strict conditions, including conserving roughly 4,000 acres of PG&E's surrounding land in perpetuity to protect coastal habitat. That conservation piece was a big factor in the yes votes.
Why is this one permit such a big deal?
Diablo Canyon generates almost 10% of California's electricity, making it the state's single largest power source. In a grid that's adding lots of solar and wind, it's a steady, carbon-free backbone. which matters when the sun sets and demand spikes. NPR has noted that the state's hottest evenings, when air conditioners and EV charging surge, are when Diablo's steady output helps avoid rolling blackouts. So the permit isn't the final word, but it removes a major state-level hurdle.
So the plant is cleared through 2030. Is the final federal approval in place?
Not yet. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission still has to issue renewed licenses that could stretch operations to about 2045. Over the summer, in early June, the NRC issued a safety evaluation report saying Diablo is safe to run for 20 more years. And on June 27th, it published an environmental impact statement finding no environmental barrier to renewal. But the formal license renewals, once expected by August, haven't landed as of today, and could come after regulators digest the Coastal Commission conditions. In the meantime, a March 2023 timely renewal exemption lets Diablo keep operating past its original expiration dates.
You mentioned the commission kept its focus narrow. Why limit it like that?
That's because a 2022 state law, Senate Bill 846, told agencies to enable a 5-year extension, citing reliability during heat waves and wildfire seasons. To avoid running afoul of that mandate or stepping on federal jurisdiction, the Coastal Commission focused on coastal issues it controls, think cooling water intake, shoreline work, and land protections, rather than the big question of closure. CalMatters reported that commissioners emphasized their charge was the coastline, not whether Diablo should exist. One commissioner, Jaime Lee, also said the state's surging electricity demand, partly from AI data centers, makes an imminent shutdown unlikely.
What environmental conditions come with the extension?
The headline condition is PG&E's commitment to conserve about 4,000 acres of its 12,000-acre property indefinitely, blocking development to protect habitats and viewsheds along that rugged San Luis Obispo coast. The Washington Post has pointed out that's a sizable buffer in a region with intense development pressure, and lawmakers want even more. Senator John Laird called for up to 8,000 acres ultimately protected. The permit also ties to mitigation for tribal cultural resources and biodiversity, along with monitoring around the plant's once-through cooling, which pulls in about 2 million gallons of seawater a day. Environmental groups, citing state filings, say that intake kills roughly 2 billion larval fish a year, which is one reason they oppose the extension.
Who's leading the opposition, and what are they saying?
The Environmental Defense Center, Mothers for Peace, and Friends of the Earth are at the front. They argue the extension is unnecessary, harms marine life, and slows the build-out of renewables and battery storage. Attorney Jeremy Frankel of the Environmental Defense Center said, quote, "We maintain that any extension of Diablo is unnecessary," end quote, and he points to the continuing problem of storing radioactive waste that can remain hazardous for centuries. They're also raising safety concerns tied to seismic faults and what they call lapsed maintenance.
That maintenance critique keeps coming up. What's the specific issue?
Friends of the Earth and Mothers for Peace argue that critical inspections of Unit 1's reactor pressure vessel were delayed nearly 2 decades. In a September 14, 2023 petition to the NRC, docketed under 10 CFR 2.206, they said metallurgical surveillance and ultrasound checks that were last done in 2003 to 2005 were put off, and they warned radiation embrittlement could make the steel more prone to cracking. Their expert, UC Berkeley materials scientist Digby McDonald, reinforced that concern and criticized PG&E for leaning on data from so-called sister reactors rather than strictly site-specific results. The Associated Press has noted similar disputes at other aging reactors, but Diablo's case became a test because of California's high stakes.
Did the NRC address that claim?
It did, and not just in passing. In a director's decision dated June 26, 2025, the NRC rejected calls for an immediate shutdown, saying there wasn't evidence of an imminent safety risk. Its June safety evaluation report affirmed Diablo's aging management programs, including embrittlement monitoring through surveillance capsules and neutron fluence calculations, and a Westinghouse report shows the plant's pressurized thermal shock screening values meet federal limits. PG&E removed a long-awaited surveillance capsule in April of this year during a refueling outage, and testing is expected to take 12 to 18 months, meaning results could arrive in mid to late 2026. The Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee's annual report, dated June 30, 2024, also said the units comply with embrittlement criteria for up to 60 years of operation.
Are there any court rulings on these disputes?
Yes. In January of this year, on the 18th, the Ninth Circuit sided with the NRC after Friends of the Earth and Mothers for Peace challenged the agency's decisions on inspections and Diablo's timely renewal exemption. The court acknowledged there had been postponements but concluded regulators had not created an undue risk. Earlier, a March 4, 2024 petition for enforcement was closed out by the NRC, and that closure stood in the June director's decision. So the legal track has largely validated the regulator's approach, even as the activists keep pressing.
Let's talk money. How much is this extension costing, and who pays?
The 2022 law came with a $1.4 billion state loan to PG&E to cover extension costs. The idea was to repay it from federal funds and the plant's profits, but state analysts, as reported by the San Francisco Chronicle, say up to $588 million might not be recovered, creating potential exposure for taxpayers. Separately, last year, the California Public Utilities Commission approved $723 million in ratepayer funds spread across utilities like Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric to support Diablo's continued operation because it benefits the broader grid. The legislature nearly stripped out a $400 million chunk of that loan in 2024 amid budget worries, which shows how politically fraught the financing remains.
What are supporters saying to make the case?
They argue Diablo is essential as a bridge, stabilizing the grid while more storage and transmission catch up with California's fast-growing renewable fleet. Senator John Laird called the land deal a, quote, remarkable victory, end quote, for conservation, and urged even more acreage be protected. Assemblymember Don Addis has emphasized conditions to safeguard tribal resources, biodiversity, and the thousands of local jobs attached to the plant. Business groups, including Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation President Dora Westerlund, describe Diablo as an, quote, economic lifeline, end quote, not only for San Luis Obispo County but for manufacturers and farms that need reliable power inland.
Diablo's been controversial for decades because of earthquakes. How is that piece addressed now?
The plant was built in the 1960s and 1970s, and fault lines discovered after construction sparked protests that have never fully quieted. PG&E and the NRC say Diablo has been retrofitted and inspected to meet modern seismic standards, and recent NRC audits didn't find a showstopper. The plant also undergoes periodic seismic hazard reevaluations, and that independent safety committee I mentioned says the current design basis covers no nearby faults. Still, as the Washington Post has reported, the optics of two concrete domes on a cliff above the Pacific will always stir anxiety in earthquake country.
You mentioned AI earlier. How is that influencing this debate?
It's become a real factor. Commissioner Jaime Lee pointed out yesterday that data centers are multiplying, and their power demand is surging. Bloomberg has tracked that nationwide, and California is right in the mix. The state's load forecasts are being revised up, which makes a firm resource like Diablo more attractive to planners. On top of that, trade publications like Utility Dive have noted Diablo has piloted AI tools in operations and maintenance, which PG&E says can improve predictive maintenance, though critics see it as marketing rather than a safety breakthrough.
Step back for a moment. How did we get from a 2016 shutdown plan to keeping Diablo through at least 2030?
In 2016, PG&E brokered a deal with environmental groups, labor, and state officials to retire Diablo by 2025, assuming renewables and energy storage would take over. Then the extreme heat waves and wildfire seasons of recent years led to tight power supplies and a couple of close calls with rolling outages, especially in 2020 and 2022. Governor Gavin Newsom reversed course in 2022, backing Senate Bill 846 to extend the plant 5 years and keep the lights on while more batteries, transmission, and offshore wind are built. CalMatters reports that turning that ship around required emergency loans, procurement orders for new clean resources, and a lot of political capital.
What happens next, and what should we watch for on timing?
The big next step is the NRC's final decision on renewing the licenses, which, if approved, would run about 20 years and take Diablo to roughly 2045. That decision was once expected by late summer, but as of today, December 12th, it's still pending and could be finalized after the Coastal Commission's conditions are baked into the record. In the near term, PG&E will have to implement the land conservation commitments and any monitoring the state required, while continuing to operate under that timely renewal exemption. And mid to late next year, into 2026, we should see lab results from the surveillance capsule pulled in April, which both sides will scrutinize for signs of embrittlement.
How are people on the Central Coast taking this?
It's a mix of relief and frustration. Labor unions and many businesses are relieved, saying thousands of jobs and local tax revenue remain intact, and the San Luis Obispo Tribune has covered how the plant's payroll supports schools and services. Environmental groups are vowing to keep fighting in court and at the NRC, and they plan to track marine impacts closely. Tribal representatives have asked for deeper consultation on cultural sites in the conserved lands, and some residents simply want a clear off-ramp with more specific dates and milestones.
Big picture, what does this say about California's clean energy transition?
It shows California is trying to thread a needle hit steep climate targets while keeping the grid reliable during hotter summers and rising demand. Diablo is becoming a bridge resource that gives time for more offshore wind, long-duration storage, and new transmission, but it also keeps alive arguments about nuclear waste, cost, and coastal ecology. The Washington Post and CalMatters both frame it as a broader test of how a renewable heavy grid can meet 24/7 demand without running short at sunset. And nationally, support for nuclear has ticked up, which gives Diablo's backers more cover, even as California's environmental movement remains deeply divided over this plant.
Last thing, what's the risk if the NRC says no or takes much longer?
If the NRC ultimately said no, Diablo would have to wind down, though that's unlikely given the safety findings they've already issued. A longer delay, though, would keep uncertainty hanging over grid planners and could make it harder to retire gas plants, as state regulators have warned in hearings. For now, the exemptions in place mean Diablo keeps running legally, and the Coastal Commission's vote yesterday removes a big variable at the state level. The next real inflection point is the NRC's final stamp and those embrittlement test results.
Clear and comprehensive, as always. Chloe Nguyen, thanks for walking us through it.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The European Union is freezing roughly 210 billion euros in Russian central bank assets, indefinitely, by tapping Article 122, an emergency lane change that turns a unanimous vote into a qualified majority and pulls the brakes on 6-month renewals. Most of the money is parked at Euroclear in Belgium and will back a hefty reparations loan for Ukraine's military and budget needs. Hungary's Viktor Orban calls the move a rule-of-law wrecking ball, while Belgian officials warn of long-term legal potholes for their finance sector. The upshot: veto power from pro-Moscow holdouts gets towed off the road just before a pivotal leaders' summit and amid wider U.S.-led peace talks. Europe is swapping stopgap sanctions for a parking brake. In Washington state, an atmospheric river turned highways into high seas and front yards into fjords. Officials describe catastrophic flooding. In Welcome, riverbanks crumbled and at least 2 homes plunged into the Nooksack. In Sumas, helicopters plucked families from rooftops as water reportedly rose to 15 feet. Governor Bob Ferguson declared a statewide emergency. Roughly 78,000 residents in the Skagit floodplain are under evacuation orders as levees face a trial by water. Major routes, including US 2 and parts of I-90, are blocked, marooning mountain towns like Stehekin. With the Snohomish already past all-time highs and the Skagit set to stress test decades-old defenses, the Pacific Northwest's rainy day fund is overdrawn. When it rains, it pours, and this one brought the receipt. A federal judge in Massachusetts ordered the Trump administration to unfreeze billions in the BRIC program, ruling the grant cancellations unlawful and squarely smacking into the Impoundment Control Act. U.S. District Judge Richard G. Stearns sided with 22 states and D.C., directing FEMA to restore about $4.5 billion for pre-disaster mitigation, from flood walls and stormwater upgrades to grid hardening that had been iced in April 2025 as wasteful. The decision is a civics lesson, with concrete results. Congress writes the checks, the executive can't just tear them up. For communities counting on projects to meet the next storm or spark, the money goes from mothballs to mortar. Separation of powers meets preparation of infrastructure. On Capitol Hill, healthcare hopes hit a procedural pothole. The Senate shot down 2 rival measures, leaving Enhanced Affordable Care Act premium subsidies on track to lapse at year's end. A Democratic bid for a 3-year extension fell short 51 to 48, despite 4 Republican yeas, and a GOP swap-in for health savings accounts also stalled. The consequence is sticker shock. About 22 million Americans face steep hikes when credits expire December 31, 2025, with KFF estimating average premiums could more than double up 114% if Congress doesn't re-up. After a shutdown-ending deal, the follow-through fizzled. Without a bipartisan bridge, coverage could slip through the cracks in 2026. Policy gridlock meets premium grid spike. And Microsoft is putting its cloud where its mouth is, pledging $17.5 billion in India from 2026 to 2029, its biggest Asian bet yet. CEO Satya Nadella, fresh from talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, says the plan will boost sovereign capabilities, launch a new hyperscale region in Hyderabad by 2026, and plug AI into government platforms like eShram. The push builds on a prior $3 billion and aims to skill 20 million Indians in AI by 2030. For India's digital economy, that's not just blue sky, it's more silver lining. In the race to compute, Hyderabad gets the bite stuff. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.